You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, May 7th, 2023, around 3 p.m. Sunday afternoon. And we are here together to play in the loosest sense of the word, Dear Holmes, the mail-based serialized mystery game, story game. And we've got our fourth letter. I'm going to talk about what the fourth letter represents. This is our first playthrough of a case, broken up into months. So basically near the end of our first playthrough, the fourth and final letter that's part of the mystery. So this is our first sort of case, our first mystery of many. We'll be playing for the entire year every Sunday, and we're going to talk about that. But I think this will be our more relaxed session. And we're going to take our time and settle in, so everyone should have their tea and coffee and be prepared for a more longer, relaxed session. Because all of our previous sessions, we've known there are more letters to come. And so while we've chewed on theories, we know we're still getting our footing here. We don't know how much information is being withheld from us. But this is the fourth and final letter from the protagonist of this mystery. And so this is our last opportunity to try to figure things out before Sherlock Holmes will step in and solve it next week. So we will have time next week to talk a little bit before we open Sherlock Holmes's letter, solving it, but this is our main chance to think about it. So we may spend some time reading the other letters. I'm going to feel free to take my time to spend as much time with this as I want to. And based on everyone's replies on the YouTube videos, we're all sort of engaged in this story. But I think we're all also a little bit suspicious is not the right word, but sort of we're withholding judgment on this system because we're not quite sure how much is being withheld from us until the final letter. The premise, as I understand it, of Dear Holmes is that each case is always broken into 4 letters. 4 letters giving you additional information about some crime, some mystery, and then Sherlock Holmes solves it. And as I understood it, the premise here is that by the time you read the 4th letter, which we have in front of us, after we read it, you should be able to understand, you should have all the information you need to handily wrap it up and understand it and make a very solid guess as to what happened and be fairly confident. This is my understanding, having never played it. But that perceptive people may have a very good chance of figuring it out before they read the 4th letter. And in fact, every month there's a contest that the people at Dear Holmes hold, and they award the person who figured it out earliest and best and describes their solution best. So my understanding coming into these cases was that by the 3rd letter, we should have some very good theories and be fairly confident we should have been able to come up with something. But that hasn't been the case for us. There's been lots of interesting observations by people in the comments to the YouTube channel and while we're live. But I think we all kind of feel like we don't have enough to make a good case. We've got some alibis for people, some possible way out theories, but really the core motivation here, the core question of who benefits, is missing. Now, I'll remind you that each of these cases are written by different people, and so they're going to be calibrated differently. So we're curious to see how this one wraps up, but it's not a guarantee that they'll all be like this. So far, though, I feel like we've been thrown a little bit of a curve. It's not quite what we expected in terms of being able to solve it. On the other hand, you could look at it from the other side of it and say, whether the end is satisfying or not, it's been a wonderful tool, a wonderful vehicle to get us racking our brain for theories and motives. And for me, that's the most satisfying part of all of these cases. And you could almost make the case for creating mysteries that have no good answer, just for the exercise of trying to come up with stuff. And I would almost prefer that. So the journey is the thing here. Let me just check in with the chat. I should have checked in earlier because, as you all know, you've watched all the letters prior to this one. You can't jump in at the end here. You saw last week we had a bit of a mishap. And I take half the blame, and I put half the blame on you guys. Last week I read for a half hour before I realized I wasn't broadcasting. So I should have checked in with the chat to make sure everyone can see me. I used to do that more often. I've got my checklists, but that's what happens. You forget checklists, okay? You write the checklist, but you don't do them. I've got a whole book of checklists I've made for this channel. One's on the wall, some are in a book. But I should have followed up, but everyone says they can hear me. Part of the problem is there's a long delay on YouTube. So if you ask a question, you've got to wait 10 seconds to get a reply to it. And normally I don't want to wait. I don't want to do that. So I just assume. But there's two places things can go wrong. One is I have to make the channel start streaming and then make it go live. And anyway, the chat's live before that. So we have a mix up. Okay. John Kingsbury says I'm broadcasting. Okay. Rob says, it was a little odd. Letter 2 and 3 should have been reversed. And Debbie said, but prior to that, I was annoyed that some of the suspects weren't even introduced until letter 3. I think I would agree with Rob. It would have made more sense for letter 2 and 3 to be reversed. Yes, I agree. Okay, so let's take some time here before we get into this and just chat for a bit. I'd love to hear what projects you guys have been working on. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've been working on. But before that, I just want to show you, just for fun, oh, actually, I don't have maybe I don't have a button for it. I was going to show you the view of my OBS, but I don't really have a button for it. I could do it with the mouse, but let me just not do that. We'll do that another time. All right, what else? I saw 2 movies the other day with friends that I did not like. I saw Evil Dead Rise, which I really didn't like. I slept through most of it. When I go to the movies, I bring my earplugs, just like my mother used to do, and I would laugh at my mother, but whatever. I bring the earplugs now, and I just have naps. We tend to see double features, so, we're in the movie theater for 7 hours or so. And if the movie's not good, I just relax and get some sleep in a nice dark room with my earplugs. But Evil Dead Rise is exactly what I don't want in a horror movie. It's sort of all about the gory and the scenes that make you squirm, like something about to go into someone's eye or something. I like the credits, the opening credits, but was not a fan. Even though I am a big fan of Evil Dead 2, which has got some bizarre little comedy in it, comedy horror, that's quite good. And we also saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Now, I am on record not liking the Marvel movies. I think they're all trying to do little one-liner comedies. They're all basically comedies, slapstick, with one-liners constantly. And I don't like that. For whatever reason, when I grew up reading comics, I took them seriously. And I sort of want my superhero movies to be darker. So I'm more friendly to the Batman type stuff, even though I don't really like any of them. I mean, I loved Watchmen, I love the graphic novel, and I love the movie. That's closer to what I want out of the superhero movie, sort of adult superhero. But in general, the first 2 Guardians of the Galaxy I really liked. I thought that's the one series, the one chain of them that got the comedy right, that had that balance right, and had actors with comedic timing. Chris Pratt has very good comedic timing. But this third one, I just feel like they've milked everything they can out of that formula, and they're just scraping the bottom of the barrel, and it didn't need to happen, and shouldn't have happened, and we need to stop with this making 3 or 4 versions of a movie until it's dead and you're just beating the dead horse. So I don't approve of it. I don't approve of it, but I'm glad to see they're done making it. Although it seems like all movies are bad now. Like the whole quality of movies are terrible. Whenever I go home, I watch an old movie. It's a totally different experience in terms of quality and writing and everything. It just feels like they're churning them out now in ways that are not cared for. And you watch the old movies and you realize, wow, these movies were good. So on a related note, however, I came back and I watched Fatal Attraction, which is a really expertly created movie. If you haven't watched it, it's worth watching. It feels like one of those movies they would teach in film school, the quality of it. And it says, I saw Renfield and liked it. Surprisingly, talks about abuse and victimhood. Interesting. I saw Renfield and liked it as well. A fairly shallow movie, and I love the actress that's in it, Awkwafina. But it felt very forgettable to me, but okay. I have been starting to watch, I finished watching Barry, or caught up to the 4th season, which I continue to think is an amazing show. And I started watching Succession, which has been recommended to me quite a bit. And I can see why people are into it and watching it. It doesn't quite work for me. I can feel when there are shows with a substantial amount of improv, I feel it. And I don't like it. Like, it feels like it needed... what's the best word to describe it? It's self-indulgent. It's like people liking the sound of their voices and their clever little lines. And I want a writer to go through several drafts and tune up that stuff. And to me, it's just a little over the top and comical, but I can see why people like it. All right, what else should we talk about before we get started? Well, let's talk about the time of day for these streams going forward, since we're going to be playing this for the rest of the year, maybe a full 12 months from now, we'll still be playing Dear Holmes. So today's session was scheduled at 3 p.m. That's the default slot we've been playing these Sunday sessions at, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time for me. And if I don't get any clear indication that there'd be a better time Sunday afternoons, that's when we'll do it here at Sunday at 3 p.m. But I did put a poll on the YouTube community tab for this YouTube channel, which you should go to and fill out either way, whether you want it to stay at this current time or not. And let me know when would be a good time, when would be the best time for you on Sunday afternoons. I still think it's going to be in the afternoon. That's how we're doing things differently on the weekend, but I could move it as early as 1 p.m. and as late as 5 p.m. or so. So let me know somewhere between that range. Just fill in the poll on the YouTube community tab. And it would be great to get some feedback from some of you in general. Get in the habit of filling out these polls so I can get some feedback. The last poll I did asked whether you would rather have my review and looking at Mug Book, this famous 1984 ultra rare game, whether you would rather me do that live or record it. The votes were split, but majority wanted me to record a 4K thing rather than do it live, and so that's what I did. That'll be up soon. Behind me, you see that Lord of the Rings adventure book game. Greg and I played through half of it yesterday. Did not like it. We're going to play through the rest of it. We'll probably force ourselves to play through the rest of it and then do a little review of it soon. But bottom line is we did not like it. But next to it is Subterra 2, which we also recorded an hour and a half discussion of, which isn't live yet also, but will be live. I'm trying to stagger things out so that I don't flood. When I put out like 5 videos at once, everyone starts unsubscribing. Like they're just like, too much. You're bothering me. I'm getting too much ping. So I try to stretch them out. All right, what else? I did want to take the opportunity to show a little bit of some progress I've been making on my detective mystery game. So what you're looking at here are 3 sections in the wrong order. 3 sections from the sort of introduction to High and Low, which is my New York City film noir set detective game, which is meant to be an epic campaign over 3 decades, starting in 1929, of one detective. I'm going to take a little minute to talk about this, even though we're here for Dear Holmes. You can actually read these on the thread on the Board Game Geek Guild for this channel. There's a link to that on the About page of this YouTube channel. There's a link to the Game Queue, where we discuss what games to play next, but also there are a couple threads about this potential game called High and Low, which I've stolen the title from Akira Kurosawa's noir movie, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, High and Low. But I just want to show you what I've posted and what I wouldn't mind getting some feedback on it. But I've written it more like a crime dossier at this point. This is just sort of the introduction, so there's a couple pages here. These are real photos of the real locations. So this mentions 160 Pearl Street in the financial district of Manhattan, not too far from where I grew up, but this is a real photo from 1940s of this location, of this street address. Same thing, that's the idea here. The idea is that this game is half mystery game, half long-form mystery game, half what I call time travel tourism, real history of the real city. So anyway, you can see the amount of text is probably a bit overkill. That starts there, then he's going to a different building, and dialogue. No, you're on rails in the beginning here, just getting introduced to people and our main protagonist. Another little location, go have lunch there. Then you're here at police headquarters. This is the real police headquarters in 1930s on Center Street in Little Italy. A little description of the history of the buildings and stuff. It's sort of sticking in some history while you're reading this noir story. So that's what I've been working on the last week or so, and sort of fine-tuning it and trying to get a feel, mainly, for whether I can tell this game, whether this game will work as first person, told through first person, which seems to me a little more natural for the noir genre. Almost all of these games, like Sherlock Holmes, Consulting Detective, even the crime dossiers, are all written third person. Most fiction mystery games are, and there are some advantages to that in terms of engaging the reader. I think the reader can put themselves into the picture if it's sort of told third person. But if you're telling it through the eyes of a protagonist, maybe it won't be as engaging. Maybe you won't feel like it's really you or you're there. So I was curious about that. So I've been doing a bit of writing to see if that works. And I'd love to hear some feedback from you. There are links to these documents on that thread, as well as a discussion of the maps and the structure of the game. And I have some thoughts about that. And I am trying to sort of put together, there's still only like a 5% chance this will ever come to fruition. But I am trying to put together sort of a team of people who might want to work on this with me, help write cases, do graphic design, work on the maps. I think I've narrowed down an idea for the maps, that there's going to be, this game is going to be very focused on neighborhoods, giving each neighborhood in New York City its own personality and style and like a character. And so I'm thinking now that we'll have one map for each neighborhood, sort of a Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective style map, but multiple maps for different neighborhoods. Anyway, if you're interested in that, or in collaborating, or even just play testing eventually, it probably will never happen, but maybe you can help make it happen by stopping by that thread on the Board Game Geek Guild for the channel. Okay, what else do we need to talk about before we start? 20 minutes we've been talking so far. Okay, I did want to, I guess while we're talking about movies, I'm probably going to go over to Greg's house later tonight or soon to record on his movie channel maybe a top 10 comedies. So I've got my top 10 comedies. If you're interested in that kind of thing, you might visit Greg's channel and keep your eye open for that. Anything else? I do have a couple of I've been reading a book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. He's an economist that's written about biases in human cognition and a theory of two systems, a fast system and a slow system. And there are a couple things in there, one in particular, that is really relevant and interesting and counterintuitive, relevant for our mystery game playing and handwriting reading and stuff. But I think maybe I'll save that for when we play our next game, which is a good segue. I do want to play a bunch of games on the channel, longer games on the channel this month, and I was going to play yesterday, but it didn't happen. So if you want to help decide what games to play, please do stop by that game queue, and maybe we can play a game tonight or this week. Maybe we'll finally get a chance to open that Be the Detective game, that cold case game. That may take us 2 nights, but let's get some more of those games played. Okay. Let's, and Tina says it's a very good book. Yeah, it is a really good book so far. I'm only halfway through or a quarter of the way through, but I'm really liking it so far. All right, well, let's finally get to our dear Holmes. You guys should be prepared when you come into this chat, when you come into a live stream. Please do feel free to tell me about what projects you're working on, or maybe if you've seen some good YouTube channels that you've discovered. I was just watching, it's fun to talk about the psychology of YouTube. I tend to do it on the live stream, so maybe I won't talk about it here. But there's yeah, we'll save it for the next live stream. There's almost 2,000 subscribers to the channel, so maybe when we get 2,000 subscribers, I'll do another live stream Q&A and talk about some crazy thoughts about YouTube psychology, some of the unhealthy YouTube psychology. All right, shall we open this up and take a look at letter 4, and then maybe we'll back up and go through other letters. I do think one thing we're learning from here, last week we sort of made a list of the suspects. I think probably this would be a good use case for our live stream notes document. This would have been a good case since it's a case that lasts for a month, where we're adding more information as we read it. Probably we should have started a live stream document, a note document, collaborative document on Google Docs to work on this. But that's okay. For our first one, we didn't, but I think maybe going forward we will. Okay, let's read our letter. Chalfont Estate, Chalfont St. James, Buckinghamshire, 29 June. Okay, so this is just a couple days, 29 June 1924, a couple days since our previous letter. Dear Mr. Holmes, I have spoken with Mr. Grant and have news to deliver concerning Jackie Dowes. But things have taken a foul turn and I'm shaken to the core. We now have a murder on our hands. Okay, this is starting to sound like it's closer to the theory other people had that we were playing with, that these dog things are to a cover-up, to throw blame away from someone who's got a murder planned. Let's read. It was midday when I received a visit from Sergeant Milton, and although my instinct had been correct, another incident involving a dog, the reason for his call was more dreadful than what I had imagined. A man, he told me, had been found in town that morning, dead, with a stab wound to the stomach. This was in the same alley, Dragon Alley, where Miss Violet Harper found Mercer's dog Tugger. A quantity of dog hair was found scattered about the crime scene, said the sergeant. As you reported the previous incident in the alley and the other concerning Lord Chalfont's dog, I figured you might know something of this, Mr. Bradley. This was the man we found. He passed a picture over to me. My heart nearly stopped as I immediately recognized the young victim, my assistant, Mr. Derry. I mentioned this to Milton. The sergeant asked me if I was aware of any relatives of Derry, on the estate or anywhere else, and I had to admit that I was not. He hadn't been at the estate long, I offered. I don't know much about him. But he wasn't shy about his visits to the Pheasant. Loved the place. No surprise he was there. Sergeant Milton went on. Well, you had better come to the station and perform the formal identification of the body. If you think you could throw any light on the matter, we can pay a visit to the alley afterwards. I agreed without hesitation. Mr. Holmes, you will be more used to identifying the body of a deceased man than I am. Nevertheless, I can say that Derry's wound, I am sure, would have caused any man a swift death. Besides that wound, there were several bruises on his face and a slightly larger one on his shoulder. I confirmed for the sergeant that the body was that of Mr. Derry, and I signed several documents indicating as much. Once I had done so, the sergeant took me to Dragon Alley, where Mr. Allison had been asked to join us. "The murder took place in the early hours of this morning," said the sergeant. "We think your assistant, Derry," I nodded. "Derry, yes. Well, he had been drinking after hours in the pub. The Pheasant has its fair share of customers. They stay open for special hours often, much later than they should, legally speaking. We find them, a few nights later they're back on it, and so it goes. It seems that Derry was at the pub's special hours last night, wandered into the alley, and found himself in a sort of brawl, as you can see." He held up a handful of coarse gray hair. "There was plenty of dog hair, too. Even now the wind hasn't swept it all away. There was no dog around when we arrived, but several barmaids have confirmed a frighteningly large stray dog roaming the alley as of late. Constable Keady also saw a large patchy-haired dog running about on his patrol earlier." "I would say it's an Irish wolfhound," said Allison. "Good news, in any case, is that I find that when I can't catch my patient, as here," he added dryly, "it means that nothing too much is wrong with it." "We suspect the attacker, or attackers, fled after stabbing Derry," said Sergeant Milton. We stood in silence for a couple of minutes, and then he turned to me. "Mr. Bradley," the sergeant asked, "the first attack you reported was at the Chalfont estate, and I know from that you are often up early. Did you see anything this morning that might cast light on this?" I told him, "Today I rose at 5 o'clock. I remember being able to smell hot metal from the smithies, which suggested Mr. Droy was up early as well. Normally he waits until the horses are brought to him. I also encountered Mr. Bertram. He was looking for his terrier and asked if I had seen it, but I was unable to help him. One of the maids did find it for him later. He had been hiding in the chef's room. Mr. Derry, of course, was not to be found when I rose, though that is nothing strange." "Well, anything else?" asked the sergeant, recording my comments in his notebook. "After I had given the dogs their morning food and water, I went to the hall hoping for an early breakfast. I found that the kitchen was already in full swing, despite the fact John, the apprentice, was handling everything today. Boys come a long way. The butler, Mr. Summers, that is, and one of the kitchen maids, Miss Ruby, were in an animated conversation, although they stopped as soon as they saw me. I think Summers was talking about a loss in poker. John eagerly explained to me while I ate that Lefebvre had been with his ailing wife for the past day or so. He says he can't properly digest the food. She can't properly digest the food we make for the estate, so I'm preparing some gruel especially for her," he said. "Monsieur Lefebvre taught me the recipe, though I nearly had to beg. Lots of ingredients I'd never touched before, lots of bitter leaves, liver even. He learned it while traveling. These sorts of foods, he says, allow her body to absorb the nutrients more easily. In other words, the estate felt, as it always does this morning, nothing out of the ordinary save for John's newfound leadership." Okay. With my account in hand, Sergeant Milton dismissed Mr. Allison and I, saying that he would deliver any pressing updates to the Chalfont estate. Lord Chalfont, he assured me, would be promptly informed of the incident involving his staff. For my part, I determined to carry out the tasks you had assigned me, after which I would write you this letter. You asked if I could try and speak with the owners of the 2 dogs which I have previously written. Mrs. Mercer, I learned, is presently staying with her daughter across town. Still, the 2 were gracious enough to offer me a cup of tea. Mrs. Mercer looked to be very embarrassed about what happened with her dog. I try my best with Tugger, but he's nimble, and I'm not young anymore, and the leg here doesn't help. She explained that she plans to start living with her daughter's family by the end of the year. It's too much trouble staying at the house myself. Even with the help I get, people are kind to me. Mr. Joy helps me with any repairs I might need. Mr. Allison never charges me for helping with Tugger. And Lord Chalfont often has his chef send me food. I'm truly blessed. But it still isn't easy. I can't keep up. It's how Tugger got away. I told Mrs. Mercer that I'd be glad to assist her with Tugger if the need were ever to arise, but I surmise her 2 grandchildren will start to occupy the dog's time nicely. After this, I was able to speak briefly with Mr. Wallace Grant. I paid a visit to his forge and introduced myself, noting that I was one of Lord Chalfont's staff. The jolly man welcomed me in with a grin, though unfortunately I did not come bearing pie, as he had expected. Lefebvre hasn't been over in almost a week. Me and my wife miss his delicious cooking. You mustn't tell him that, though. You must tell him that we miss him. I told him I was responsible for Lord Chalfont's hounds and that we had suffered from a rather strange attack, which had reminded me of the recent incident with his own dog. Blueberry's always in and out of the forge. Sometimes he's gone all day, but I got worried last time. He was gone for almost 2 days. I hate to do it, but I should thank Mr. Allison. He brought back the old pooch, and I appreciate that. I attempted to pose a question, but Mr. Grant was impassioned. It's the man's uncivil attitude I don't care for. Took the dog to him months ago, and it felt like I was on trial before a judge. Veterinarian, doctor, or zookeeper, I don't care. My Blueberry has eaten scraps of cheese all his life and has always been healthy. Allison was convinced I was slowly killing my dog by means of poor diet. The stout man began coughing at this point. I calmed him, suppressing a laugh, and thanked him for speaking with me. I also mentioned there was news concerning Jackie Dowes. I should not consider this to be good news, but the information is fortunate in that it suggests the boy is uninvolved with these crimes. While at the station, I overheard a conversation between the 2 constables. The butcher's delivery boy, that is Dowes, was caught stealing from Witherden's, or rather, he was witnessed and subsequently chased to no avail. The constable recounting this mentioned he was last seen heading west out of Chalfont St. James 2 days ago. Most importantly, the reason for their discussion appeared to be that Dowes was arrested last night in Gerrard's Cross after attempting to steal from a small inn. So, Mr. Holmes, we await the next events with trepidation. As I write this, there is a somber air about us all. Derry might have been solitary, but the inhabitants of the Chalfont's estate are mourning, and in fear. Few people were asking about the dog ordeal before, but in light of the murder, nobody can help but wonder what disaster might come next. As for Sergeant Milton and the police investigation, I should note that they gave me no indication as to who they might believe is committing these acts. I hope and pray that you can give an investigation into this matter your full and immediate attention. Please bring an end to this. Signed, Peter Bradley. Okay. So, there's our 4th and final letter, and it did end with a real human murder. And the murdered victim was my primary suspect, Mr. Derry. I thought he made a good suspect. Now he's been killed. Troubling. Well, nothing jumps out to me. I do not, after reading this, I don't have a sudden inspiration of who's doing all this and why. But we do have some interesting big picture questions to answer. For example, was Derry the intended victim all along, or did he stumble into what it sounds like he stumbled into, some sort of brawl? It almost sounds like, at face value, that he has stumbled onto someone attacking a dog and got killed for it. Rob seems to agree. It was an unexpected murder, seems unplanned. So when I first heard that there was a murder here, I thought, aha, okay, it's confirmation of the theory that some people had. This was all staging to throw blame away from someone. Now it sounds like Mr. Derry may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time at the Pheasant and got himself killed. But let's look at it deeper while the chat is opining. Although Emmy says something interesting here. Let me look at it for a second. At one point, I wonder if there might be betting on dog fights at the pub. That is a very interesting idea. Boy, that's an interesting idea. But then, is it possible that it's not just dog fights, but it's dogs versus humans fights or something? I do want to point out something that comment makes me think of, worth considering. So our very first case, right? He gets woken up before 5 a.m. He finds the dog's barking and a stabbed dog. And we assumed that someone had snuck into the dog's kennel and stabbed one of the dogs. But you could also imagine, the other two dogs are hurt in town. You could imagine a scenario where the dog was actually injured in town and dropped, like one of the dogs was taken from the pound, from the enclosure at night to some dog fight, and then dropped off in the enclosure at 5 a.m. by someone coming back from town. The only problem here is that these dogs do not appear to be in fights. At least the original dog stabbed was not in a fight. He just had one clean wound. He had no other signs of being in a struggle. Okay. Let's go back to the chat and see what we've got here. Debbie says, Lefebvre's been out of commission for a week. He claims to be shut up with his wife. No proof of that. He's feeding her special food. Well, one of our theories was that he's poisoning his wife, but now we're told here that the assistant was taught how to prepare her food. So that seems to lean against the idea that she's being poisoned by the chef. Originally, we were told he won't let anyone touch her special food, but now it sounds like he's teaching his assistant to make it, and he's just a little eccentric in terms of what he thinks she needs. Anna says, what's with the shabby dog everyone's been seeing? Could Derry have seen something in a place where they weren't supposed to be? Do I understand that correctly? The dogs survived attacks while the assistant did not. No dogs have died. That's correct. Although the dog that got stabbed in the flank seems like a pretty serious wound. But it's true. And the dog that got hit on the head, all the dogs have survived. But the poisoned dog, it looks like we saved by making him vomit up. So I'm not sure it means that no one was trying to kill any dogs. Let's look a little bit. Let's reread this a little bit. Okay. So we have a murder. All right. It's midday on the 29th of June. A man was found that morning. Okay, so a body's found in the morning. Same alley. Stab wound to the stomach. Same kind of wound that got the first dog. Dog hair scattered about the crime scene. Okay, so obviously a human has stabbed him, not a dog. I was thinking, could it be dog fighting in some way? But obviously whoever killed this guy is a human. And then it's Derry, the assistant. Okay, relatives know. He hasn't been at the estate long. That's why I suspected him. He was sort of a newcomer to all this. He loved the pheasant. He makes identification. Derry's wound would have caused a swift death. So one wound kills him in the stomach. But several bruises on his face, a larger one on his shoulder. What does that sound like to you? Wound on the shoulder, like maybe attack from behind? Bruises on his face, that sounds like a fight with a man, a human fight. I'm not sure what the larger one on the shoulder is, except if someone hits someone with a cane, with like a hammer. Okay, early hours of the morning. Just look over this. Drinking after hours. This is another suspicious part. Pheasant has its fair of customers. They stay for special hours, later than they should. So he's at the pub very late into the night. They think he wandered into the alley and was involved in a brawl, as you can see. Then he says there's the coarse gray hair from dog hair. Still hasn't been swept away. There's no dog around when they arrive, but several barmaids have confirmed frighteningly large stray dog, patchy-haired, running around. Constable Keaty also saw, so this is not a made-up thing. The constable actually saw the large patchy-haired dog. So there is really a large patchy-haired dog running about. Allison says, I think it's probably an Irish wolfhound. And then he makes a comment that's a little weird, but I think he's basically saying since the dog's not on the scene, he must be okay. Irish wolfhound, he thinks it is. Okay. Attackers fled after stabbing Derry. So it sure sounds like he got in a fight and then got stabbed. With one person or maybe more than one. Now he tells us about his morning. He got up at 5. The smithy is up already. Troy, up early. Then he finds Bertram with the terrier. This is the valet of Lord Chalfont. And he's lost his terrier. Hiding in the chef's room. That's a little odd. Almost like, was he hiding in the chef's room or did the chef lock him in a closet or something? Anything else? He feeds his dog. He goes to the hall for breakfast and he sees that the chef is gone, right? Only John is doing everything. The chef is not on the scene. The assistant is, however. Then they're talking about a loss in poker, so a need for money, perhaps. Lefebvre had been with his wife, so he says. And he says she can't properly digest the food, which would make sense. And then he says, I'm preparing some food for her. Lefebvre taught me the recipe, though I nearly had to beg. Lots of ingredients I'd never touched before, bitter herbs, which might make us think of poison, liver even. He learned it while traveling. These sorts of foods, he says, allow our body to absorb the nutrients more easily. Is it? One crazy theory is we did highly suspect the chef because he doesn't have good alibis. And is it not that the chef is poisoning his wife but feeding her like dogs? Like the chef was on some expedition where people died. You could imagine that would lead him to eat carnivorously or eat their dogs. What if he sort of decided that eating dogs is what can save you? Let's continue rereading this letter a little bit. He said that the sergeant says he'll deliver any updates, And then this is sort of the mechanics of the game. He asked us on the last letter, is there anything we want him to do? And now this is basically saying that Holmes asked him to find out some information about the owners of the dog. So the first owner is Miss Mercer. She says she's just a woman. She can't take care of her dog. She tells us about some people that help her. Allison never charges. Allison is the vet. She doesn't like that the vet is so strict or something. Oh, that's the other guy who says that. Everyone's going to help. Okay. Then we talk to the other owner, which is the guy who runs the smithy, the blacksmith. Blacksmith is visited by Lefebvre regularly, but not in almost... Lefebvre hasn't been here in almost a week. He normally brings them pies. He says Blueberry's always in and out of the forge. Nothing strange about that. Sometimes he's gone all day. He called the vet, Mr. Allison, who brought back the dog, but then chewed him out for not taking good care of the dog. So obviously Mr. Allison cares about dogs. Allison is not going to be the attacker here. Probably. I mean, you could imagine a scenario where Allison's trying to build up his work by stabbing dogs. I mean, Allison, if you ask who benefits from all these dogs being injured, in some sense, Mr. Allison, the vet, is the one that benefits since they come to him for work. They pay him to take care of the dogs. But Mr. Allison seems to genuinely care about the dogs, so that would argue against him. Blacksmith says he's been feeding him cheese his whole life and he's fine. Mr. Allison says you can't feed him cheese. That's a poor diet. It'll kill him. And then we're told about Jackie Dowse. This is the girl who discovered the first poison dog. And he says, well, the boy she was going to meet, it can't be him. He's on the run. He's been out of town and was finally caught. So he seems to have a timeline alibi. Wow, that's a tricky one. Nothing really jumps out. Okay, let's read some of these things. The dogs were left to die. Nobody took their bodies. Nicholas said, in the polar mission, one of the men actually died because they ate dog liver. Eating liver all the time. And then there's some theory about the werewolf. The chef's wife is the shabby wolf dog, a.k.a. the werewolf. And he says, if the stray dog is very big, could that be the cause of the dog barking in the first letter? It got in with the dogs and it freaked them out. Someone went in to separate the dogs and stabbing one. That seems crazy to me. Let me just read up a little bit about I wonder if the shabby dog wolfhound is a stray or it's going to round with someone like an attack dog. Can we look back at what was said about Derry in the previous letter? Yes, we'll look back at the other letters. We're going to take our time here. So let's focus on this one first, then we'll go back. Could the large patchy-haired dog be a disguise? Someone's dressing up like a dog? No. Multiple people have seen this dog. Multiple reliable people. A police constable and barmaids. You don't see a person dressed as a dog and mistake it. Multiple people don't mistake it. So there really is an Irish wolfhound running around. Anna says, when a dog bites you, it looks like a bruise. Wolfhound could bite him on the shoulder. Boy, that seems like a really unlikely event to me, of a dog biting you on the shoulder and it looking like a bruise. First of all, him getting up to your shoulder and then it looking like a bruise, that doesn't work for me. Rob says, we don't know how reality-based these cases are, so maybe it really is something like a werewolf. Some of the Holmes novels do have themes kind of like that, the creeping man. Anna says, but in Sherlock Holmes stories, it always turns out there's a reasonable explanation for everything. The other thing I'll point out is the wounds and deaths are not consistent with a werewolf or someone pretending to be a werewolf. It's like one knife wound in each person. A werewolf would cut people up like crazy. And a werewolf doesn't poison dogs or hit them in the head with a hammer. Rob said, that's the only theory I can come up with that would explain all the attacks, including the weird stuff with the bear. And maybe it's not a proper werewolf, some exotic disease. Anna says, but the first dog was stabbed with a knife. Second was poisoned. It wasn't the shabby dog. Yeah, someone is a human stabbing people. Stabbing them once. It's not personal. They're not madmen stabbing someone 100 times. It feels to me like the most likely scenario here is that Derry, who likes to frequent the Pheasant, stumbled into something in the alley and got himself killed by the real person who's the bad guy. That's the most likely scenario I see for Derry's murder. Derry leaves the bar late at night. He sees something going on. He tries to intervene. And he gets beaten up and stabbed by a human, not a dog. But what did he stumble onto? He stumbled onto something torturing a dog, I think. Right? There's all the gray hair in the alley or something. I think he stumbled onto someone attacking a dog and tried to stop it. I think he stumbled onto someone trying to hurt this stray dog that's been seen around town. Debbie says, I'm still very suspicious about Lefebvre. Don't think the food is for his wife, even if it's not poisoned. He's giving it to dogs for some reason. Interesting. Anna says, or maybe Derry was attacking the dog, so the shabby dog killed him in revenge with a knife. Rob says, the chef has to be involved. There's so much text about him and his wife. Maybe someone wants to catch the wolfhound. Look for a cage big enough to hold a bear. Experimenting with different ways to incapacitate dogs. Nicholas says, has it been pointed out that Lefebvre was sending foods for the dog that was poisoned? Are you Nicola, are you saying that there was mentioned? Has it been pointed out Lefebvre was sending food for the dog that was poisoned? Is that true? And Tina says, did we stop considering what we were told about the sun? Debbie says, like Anna said earlier, liver is the kind of food you give dogs. Bitter herbs could be a drug of some kind. Nicholas says, Mrs. Mercer said that Chalfont and his chef send food for the dog. Let me reread that. I don't remember that. All right, let me see. Here's Miss Mercer talking about the dog Tugger. Okay, so Tugger is the one that was poisoned. Is that right? I think we need to make sure, because one dog was poisoned and one dog was hit in the head. Let me come back to that. But Mrs. Mercer is the owner of Tugger. Let's see what she says. Joy helps with repairs. Allison never charges for helping me with Tugger. Lord Chalfont often has his chef send me food. I don't read this as food for the dog. She says, Joy helps me with the repairs of the house. Allison, the vet, helps me with Tugger. And Chalfont sends me food. I don't think it's saying it's food for the dog. I think it's food for her. She could have given it to the dog, sure. But if he's often sending her food, he's not poisoning it. He's not trying to kill her. All right, let me present to you, however, what I think is the most likely natural explanation for all this, and then we can dive into deeper secrets. To me, it feels like the most consistent natural explanation for all this is as follows. We have someone who's sort of psychotic, hurting dogs in whatever way they can. They're stabbing a dog in the pen, they're poisoning a dog, they're hitting a dog. And that person hangs out near the pheasant. He's already attacked 2 dogs near the pheasant late at night. And last night, he was doing it again to this stray dog, this Irish wolfhound dog that's been seen around with patchy fur. He's been attacking it, pulling out its hair, torturing it. And last night, Mr. Derry, who's been known to frequent the pheasant, came out semi-drunk on his walk, getting ready to walk home like he normally does at midnight or so, 3 a.m., sees the person torturing the dog, goes to confront them. He gets beat up and stabbed. And that's it. That is the simplest, most straightforward explanation for everything we've seen. That we've got someone who's trying to torture dogs and Mr. Derry who stumbled on them at the alley. And the most likely person that would be doing this is probably Lord Chalfont's son, who we know frequents the pheasant. That is the cleanest solution. It's not entirely satisfying because it relies on the idea that the person who's doing this is motivated by just pure animus towards hurting these dogs. But it seems to me, and I'm not saying we won't look into deeper stuff, but it sure seems to me like that is the cleanest Occam's razor solution here. The least convoluted solution is we've got someone who thinks they can just walk around because they're a son of a lord. They can do whatever they want, taking out their anger on dogs that they're scared of. And Derry has stumbled into it. Does anyone have any, other than a meta-analysis that it would be unsatisfying? I'd like to hear any thoughts from the channel about counter evidence that goes against that simple theory. I don't want to get stuck on this theory, but I'd love to hear any evidence against that theory. Emmy says, Alphonse goes to that pub, that's the son of Lord Chalfont. Does he have a cane? Could it have a concealed blade? Bludgeoning and stabbing. Well, I proposed the theory last week that you could stab the first dog without having to get into the cage just by a cane with a knife on the end, and someone pointed out that would be a very Victorian style weapon, so that seemed conceivable. And it says one of the letters did ask us to prove the son's guilt. It didn't quite say it so baldly. It said, before I start accusing the son, I better have proof. So it does feel to me like maybe if you wanted to have a meta-analysis of this game, maybe the game is challenging us to prove that the son did it. Debbie says, yeah, it makes sense, but it needs more evidence. Yes, absolutely. As for dog disguise, I find that wholly implausible. I'd be pretty annoyed if that was the solution. The idea that we have the constable and the barmaid saw the dog suggests to me that the dog's really there, all the gray hair, although I guess your theory might be that it's coming off a fake costume. Jan says, why this psycho is unable to kill dogs? Well, perhaps he's not trying to kill them. The psycho's just trying to torture them. That's why he's hitting it on the head to watch it suffer but not killing it. That's why he's stabbing it and then watching it struggle. That's why he's poisoning it and watching it walk around and dying. It's like a real psycho who's not trying to kill but torture. Rob says, I refuse to believe it's a psycho killer just because that would make for an unpleasant, unsatisfying story. Debbie says, didn't Alphonse have an alibi for at least one incident? I don't think so. No, Alphonse won't even tell us his alibi. The son Alphonse doesn't have an alibi and won't even tell us where he's been. I believe, unless Rob is remembering something about Alphonse's timeline that I'm not. John Kingsbury says, I think Lefebvre stabs Derry in a tussle. So you're agreeing that Derry is stabbed in a tussle because he stumbled onto something, but you think it's Lefebvre that does it. Nicholas says, I don't understand why Lefebvre brought pies to Wallace Grant. It does seem like the chef is bringing a lot of food to people, but maybe it's just his way. Like when he goes and he gets a favor from the blacksmith, he brings a pie with him. They're sort of, they're trading. They're doing old style bartering. They're making friends with each other so that they do favors for each other. Rob says, we talked about it earlier. Alphonse was back at 11 and the bludgeoning happened around that time. No, that's not right, I don't think. It's not Alphonse that's back at 11. It was Derry that was back at 11. Derry is back at 11. He was the people you were saying had the alibi for the dog that was attacked in the morning. But Alphonse, the son, was in town all night. Yeah, I think you're mixing up Derry and Alphonse. I floated the idea that it could be Derry that did it, and that even though Derry is back in town by 11, he could have attacked the dog earlier. But it wasn't. Emmy says, I thought Derry was with us. Alphonse was back at 11. Okay, well, this is our first. Let's figure this out. Let's figure that. Let's figure that alibi out. Let's get that right. On our next case, we'll take some digital notes so we can refer to it. Okay, so let's see. Here's our first letter. Let's see. Let's see if we can find his alibi. We might reread all of these letters or look through them all. Let us, though, first try to dig into the alibi of the night. Okay. Here's the letter about the pheasant inn. Alphonse is fond of it, to say the least. Okay, so here's Derry telling us on the way home. Here is our thing. Okay, so Derry is telling us about the previous night. He says, the plague in my thought is the pheasant inn, or rather its clientele. Everyone at the estate and in town has patronized the Pheasant Inn at some point. However, his lordship's son, Mr. Alphonse, is fond of the pheasant, to say the least. I did not think to note this until Mr. Derry nervously spoke on our path home. I saw Mr. Alphonse, he started, and then fell silent. I was at the Pheasant yesterday. I left at nearly midnight. But Mr. Alphonse, I saw him on my way back to the estate. He was walking towards the inn. So, and then later, Derry is found in the kitchen grabbing a snack near 11. It's Derry who came home at 11 p.m. and had the alibi. Alphonse is there all night. He comes home early in the morning at like 5 a.m., an hour before the attack or so. I believe we find that later. Alphonse was back at 11 a.m. Okay, yeah, please, I thought you were talking about midnight. Alphonse was back at 11 a.m. Nicola estimated the attack around 11:30 a.m. I estimated a bit closer to 11. Still not enough time for Alphonse. Emmy, not then. The next day timeline, 11 a.m. It was Alphonse who had a snack. Okay, you might be right about Alphonse having a snack, but I assumed you guys were talking about being back in the evening when you really meant 11 a.m. when you said 11. So Derry is back that evening around midnight. But Alphonse is there all morning. And you're saying that Alphonse, who was there all morning and at the town and drinking until 11 a.m. the next morning, would therefore have an alibi that he couldn't have attacked the dog at 11:30 a.m. if that's when you think it happened. Okay, at least I understand your theory now. But then if that's the alibi that you're giving to okay. So yeah, let's clarify this now. The bludgeoning happened later when we investigated the poisoned dog. Okay, well, we don't know that for sure. We just know the dog is running around barking after we find the poisoned dog. That gets back to my theory that he could have been attacked earlier. But let's stick with this for a second. Let's stick with our timeline of this attacked dog. All right, so Alphonse comes back here. Let's read this part about Alphonse. The boy's afraid of animals. We have since learned that he was at the Pheasant on the evening of the 23rd. Also questioned the staff and verified that he returned to the estate by 11 in the morning. Okay, so 11 a.m. he's at the estate. Roughly an hour before I visited the police station. Maybe 11:15, he's spotted in the kitchen, heading to his bedroom with peppermints. Okay, so he's back on the estate by 11 a.m. So then the question is, does that give him an alibi for the attack of the dogs? Let's look at that again. There's some definite difference in opinion about how solid the timeline is for the dog attack. So let's try to nail that down. In the first thing in the morning, they go to the vet, and a girl comes in saying she found a dog that's poisoned. Poison, we know, happened at least 2 hours prior, I believe he says. At least or at most. Let me just verify that. At least. Okay. So we get there early in the morning, and we know that this dog has been poisoned 2 hours ago. So maybe around 9 a.m. or so. So certainly Alphonse was in town to do that dog, the poisoning. Although it could have been much earlier. Poison could have been left out all night. We don't know. Okay, that's that. We don't know exactly when this is, but sometime before noon they encounter the poisoned dog. Eventually they get to the police station at around noon. He's confirmed that around noon, they go to the police station to report the poisoned dog. When they do, he says, Constable Roberts came in just a half hour ago. So at 11:30, the constable arrives with the injured dog. Okay, 11:30 a.m. Constable arrives around 11:30 a.m. Maybe a half hour earlier. Could have even been 11 a.m. he arrives with the dog. Strangely injured dog. We say, boy, you waited so long to tell us, right? He remarks, we've been talking this whole time, and you had an injured dog you didn't tell me about. Okay, so the dog's been there for a half hour. When we talk to the constable and he tells us about this dog, he actually tells us how he had to do this elaborate thing to catch the dog. There was some ungodly barking heard, right? It attracted passers-by. One of them, a barmaid, alerted the constable who was on his beat. He went to investigate and then returned to the station. He reported that when he went to the entrance, he looked up, he saw the dog staggering around. It seemed to be somewhat aggressive. No one wanted to approach it. You could see blood. Okay. He says it's at the station now. We're not sure what to do with it. And then he tells us how he captured the dog. He says the dog's fastened by a rope. It's been here for a half hour at least. He says, when I found him, he was reeling in a tight circle because he's been injured in the head. I'd better get a Chalfont. Now, he's not carrying one with him, right? So he's got to go get it. He sees the dog. He has to go get it. He finds it somewhere. He throws it over the dog's head. Hauled him back from Pullman's Alley. So my one question to you is, when was the dog first heard? This sounds like if the dog was brought into the station 11:30, isn't it possible that this is happening before 11? That even if you want to say Alphonse the dog didn't just wake up, but couldn't Alphonse have hit this dog at 10:30 and it takes a half an hour for the crowd to gather, her to call the constable to get the Chalfont, catch the dog, bring him back? It feels to me that this dog could have been attacked by 11:30. I mean, by 10:30, and have Alphonse still have time. It doesn't seem like a clean alibi for Alphonse to me. If we're in there at around noon, right? That's what he says in this later letter that we just read. Imagine he's really there at 11:50, and then this guy says, also look, when we come in, well, we might want to read that part about how we get there at noon, but when we come in, it's been a while, because he says, I sent a messenger to your practice, but you've come here quick. So like if we get there around noon, let's imagine we get there like 11:50. He's already sent a messenger. And he says, Constable Roberts came in just a half hour ago after encountering the injured dog. So Constable Roberts could have come in somewhere 11:30, maybe even as early as 11:20 with the dog. Mightn't he not have encountered that dog an hour ago? Might it not take him an hour to go find the tarp, throw it over the dog, and bring it in? But not just that. If Constable Roberts came in at 11:20, then you have to ask, how long ago since the dog was attacked? The dog has to be attacked, then be barking, draw attention, get a crowd around it, have someone in that crowd go find the constable on his beat, call him over. That feels to me that could easily have happened at 10:30. You could easily have a situation where Alphonse leaves that bar at 10:30, hits the dog over the head, and then waltzes his way back home. I mean, it's actually pretty compatible with Alphonse leaving the bar in the early afternoon on his way home attacking this dog. Not only is it not a good timeline alibi, it feels to me like it's pretty consistent with the idea that it was attacked by Alphonse on Alphonse's way from the bar home. Let me just see here. One question is, how long does it take it to get back to the state? That's a good question. 11 sounds like the best guesstimate for when the dog was found. I think it's as good an alibi for Alphonse as we'll get. That really does not feel like an alibi to me. If the dog is found at 11 and it takes, say, 15 minutes to get home, that just means it takes 15 minutes for the crowd to gather around the dog. That's very suspicious for Alphonse to me, not an alibi. Like that puts Alphonse, think of it this way. Think of it from the other direction. That puts Alphonse at the scene of the crime 15 minutes before the dog is found alone. I mean, obviously, the dog is attacked before it's found by someone who's had time to disappear. So obviously the dog wasn't attacked. Someone has to attack the dog and leave. To me, it feels like Alphonse is on the scene of the crime minutes before the dog is discovered. That does not feel like an alibi for Alphonse to me. Let me see the chat. Anything saying how far away from the village the house is? Nicholas says, Alphonse was seen heading to his bedroom with peppermints, so it could make sense that he could have been to Withersden's confectionery before going back home. That's an interesting point. But irrelevant, right? Although, are you saying that puts him at the scene of the crime? Because him having peppermints doesn't exonerate him in any way, right? It just means before he went on his way home. We don't know when he left the inn. Nicholas says, yeah, I'm saying he would have been at the scene of the crime. Or he could have gotten peppermints from the house. So, but yeah, he's fond of the confectionaries from the candy shop. So it does sound like that would have given him a reason to be at the scene of the crime. Is that the scene of the second crime where the dogs were? Is that it? All right. Rob says the first letter told us the town is just over a mile away. Well, that's actually a great perception, a great memory if that's true. Okay, well, if town is a mile away, that makes it a 20-minute walk, 15 to 25-minute walk. A mile away, you would walk in about 20 minutes. If you were walking fast, a little faster. Reasonably fit person could walk it in 15 minutes. That's right. You'd have to walk fast to get there in 15 minutes, but absolutely. Witherden's confectionery is directly across from Pullman's alley where the dog was hit. I sort of conflated in my mind where the pheasant and the confectionery is. To me, it felt like they were both in the same basic alley, so that anyone who was at either place would be on the crime scene. If we find him at both places, that doesn't seem to add too much, but I might be mistaken about the dogs being in different locations. Is it that are they in different locations? And so the fact that we've got evidence that Alphonse was in both seems to suggest that he's more suspicious. I guess let me make one more case about this not being an alibi for Alphonse. Let me just point something out. If Alphonse came home at 2 p.m. or 1 p.m., then you'd say, okay, he doesn't have an alibi. But you'd also say, like, what was he doing between the time of the dog attack and the last 3 hours? Like, where is he? The fact that that you can have a pretty convincing timeline where he leaves the pheasant inn or the confectionery shop and then walks past where the dog is found and gets home and was basically on the scene where the dog was found within a 10-minute, 15-minute span of where we know the dog was attacked. Just seems very, very the opposite of exculpatory. It's not an exculpating evidence. It's incriminating evidence. He's just right at the scene of the crime, right near where the dog was attacked, and we don't have a firm timeline of when the dog was attacked. It does not seem difficult to posit that the dog was attacked at 10:30. Exculpatory. I mean, if the dog was attacked at 10:45, that is consistent with him getting home at 11, around 11. That seems very consistent to me. All right, but I'm overselling it a little bit. I just don't think it's an alibi. Emmy says, I could see Alphonse might have reasons for attacking stray dogs, putting out poisoned food in the village, but then why stab the dog on the estate and tamper with the bear cage? All right, well, the bear cage is a trickier thing because the only reason we think that the bear cage lock scrapings have anything to do with our case is that we're reading into it that it can't be a coincidence. But it feels to me like the most parsimonious explanation for the bear cage is that it has nothing to do with our case. Rob says bear cage mystery must be explained. I mean, in real life, you just say, it's a bear chewing on his lock, just like the guy said. Let's reread what we know about Alphonse. Yeah, let's reread through the other letters. I'm okay with that. But Rob is saying, like, the fair play nature of this mystery means that the bear cage shouldn't just be a coincidence. All right, so I'll tell you what, Nicholas says, you bring up a good question. What has Alphonse been doing all this time? Pheasant Inn would have been closed at some point during the night. Where did he go before going back home the next morning? And that is a separate interesting question. Was he could have been eating sweets at the confectionery. He could have been, we sort of got diverted from the idea that there might be like dog fights or something going on. That's not really compatible with the state of the dogs. we certainly don't have evidence really to lock in for sure Alphonse. I'm starting to think that it is Alphonse, but we have to find proof for it. I'll tell you what we'll do. This is unusual because these are supposed to be sort of hour-long sessions, but why don't we take an 8-minute break? Everyone can refresh your tea and coffee, stretch. We'll come back and maybe we'll go through the other letters. Let's spend some time. But this would be a good time. Like if you've had your fill, if your Sunday afternoons have a budgeted time of an hour for this session, that's fine. We're just going to chew on it more. It would be fine for you to sign off now, but we'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll spend some more time with the older letters. Let's see if we can hammer out some additional theories. So I will see you in 8 minutes. Students graduating here at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. All right, so lots of interesting chatter in the chat. It does pay to stop for a second. Rob was pointing out that this last letter has been a nice little curveball. He thought that we were going to get confirmation about one of our theories, but we really got a little curveball. I have to agree. I mean, any game where we can sit and talk for an hour and a half about theories and back and forth, you can't ask for too much more. You can ask for more than that, but it is nice, and no complaints from me. Even if the solution is ridiculous, if the solution is a werewolf, I'm still happy. I'd rather have this. I'd rather have stuff to chew on. All right, so lots of interesting talk in the chat about Alphonse, people think meta-analysis of the game, that there has to be an explanation for the bear. The zookeeper, the person who takes care of the bear, is the gambler. That's what Nicola points out. I think maybe we'll skim through the other letters and look for information on all these people. Practicing incapacitating dogs. That was an early theory that he's been practicing incapacitating dogs. I don't think I believe that anymore. Rob says, if the solution is ridiculous, I'll firebomb their office. I definitely don't feel that way. I'm on record. I'd rather have a ridiculous solution but a compelling case than a straightforward solution and an easy case. Before we look at these previous letters, though, I want to put you on notice that this is our fourth and final letter in this case. What that means is at the end of this session, I'm going to expect everyone here in the chat to go on record with your best guess, to make your best guess or best guesses about what you think the solution is. We can talk about it in the comments to this video over the next week until we get the official solution, but you're going to have to go on record now and take your shot. All right, so how should we do this? Shall we go backwards? Let's go backwards. So we've read our most recent letter. Where Derry is killed with a knife wound in the stomach. We're told the cook hasn't been to visit the blacksmith in a week. He normally brings them food. We're told about this Irish wolfhound whose fur is found all over the back alley. Same back alley where the dog Tugger was found. Let's remember when we get to Tugger to figure out which dog was poisoned, which dog was attacked. Emmy says, I think we should note down all of the named people and tick them off. Okay, well, again, as I said, in the future, we'll do this with digital notes. I did make a page, however, last week of the different people. We've got Lord Chalfont. He doesn't seem to be involved. We've got Alphon, the son of the Lord, who won't say where he is. He's afraid of animals. He's got political enemies. We've got Horace Adalji, who's the assistant. Weird character. He's not even mentioned in our current letter. He does seem to have an alibi time. He is scared of dogs. We've got the butler, who's got a soft alibi for the 24th. He's scared of dogs also. Mr. Lewington is the zookeeper who was also the gambling, probably has gambling losses. He's got a soft alibi for his timeline. We've got Lefebvre, the chef. He's got no alibi for the first attack on Bundo, the dog, and no alibi for the morning of the 24th attacks. We believe he was in town. So he's a pretty good candidate in terms of alibis. And I guess for Alphonse Chalfont, we should say that there is, he won't say where he is, but there's debate in the group over his alibi on the 24th. I do not think he has a solid alibi. Some of you do. John League, he's the assistant to the chef. He's got a soft alibi. All these soft alibis, which means I think they're basically spoken for, but we're not 100% sure. We've got Mr. Derry. Well, he is now dead on the 29th. He was the hound's assistant. He was the guy who had PTSD. Remember that both Derry and Alphonse served in the war, I believe we're told. We've got Bertram, who's the valet. I haven't written down his alibi, but I believe he does have a solid alibi. I think he was with Lord Chalfont playing late into the night. But maybe we'll double check that when we go. I guess we should consider the possibility that we have different attackers for different dogs. Because the chat is now asking me, did Derry have an alibi for the dog that was hit in the head? I'm not sure. Rob says, the butcher boy bit was a bit weird. Got quite a bit of text in this letter, even though he seemed like a very peripheral figure. If not, Derry could be the one attacking the dogs and someone saw him kill them. It doesn't make sense to me that Derry is attacking the dogs and someone killed him, but then doesn't speak up. Like someone would report, wouldn't you think, that they tried to stop him from killing the dogs and ended up stabbing him? And then I've got a little note. All right, so I have our list of people. We can fill that in as we go. Let's work backwards now. Derry's killed on the 29th. Debbie says, could there be a connection between Derry and Alphonse regarding World War I? There certainly could be. All right, so letter 3 is the what you might call the biographies letter. So letter 3 is our biographies letter. Letter 4 is Derry killed. And we're still holding open the possibility that Derry's killed on purpose, but that he was the motive behind all this. Certainly doesn't feel this way. Okay, so 3 days prior to Derry being killed, our guy Bradley is writing to tell us about some of the people on the estate. Chalfont's 54. Let's just go through this quickly. Okay, so he says, I'm answering information you asked for. Okay, Chalfont estate is large, extensive staff. He's only going to tell us about people he knows about personally. Lord Chalfont, who's not a suspect for us. He's been working for him since 1894, so 30 years. He's a huntsman. He's got political connections. He has upset people. He does have some enemies, but no one on staff. The most that's ever happened is someone threw some rice at him or something for dirtying the rug. Okay, so here's one of our key suspects, Alphonse. Let's read this carefully. He's got a fair-sounding combination of names, but is a queer fish. Most call him Mr. Alphonse to avoid confusion with his father. As you know, he's a frequent visitor to the Pheasant, has an affinity for sweets. We knew that already. 31, unmarried, is his father's heir presumptive, so he can talk about politics, which creates problems, which the Lord pays off. Most recently, he got into trouble at parish elections when he cried out threats to the aristocracy and their weapons of subjugation. So he's not a fan of the aristocracy. Most of the estate's staff can tell the story as if they witnessed it because the secretary was there. Okay, fine. It is worth mentioning, despite his unusual opinions, he's nobody's fool. He's a smart guy. He studied biology, and he served in the Great War, but he won't talk about his service. You might assume it was dishonorable, but no, he's got an impressive number of decorations. So he served with distinction in the war. The wardship is forgiving to a fault, and he won't say where he was on the night before the attack on Bundo, or any night. So he won't give us an alibi for the attack on Bundo, or doesn't deign to give us any information about where he was at any time. We ask the assistant, Adalji, and he says that the boy's afraid of animals. He's barely willing to walk by the gardens because he thinks grizzly or bear, the alligator or the bear, might get out. But hey, here's an idea. Is he messing with the bear's lock to make sure it's strong enough? Was he the one that... Is he trying to get that lock replaced? Did he either say anything to the keeper or put some shavings to make it look like, or test it to make it to, because he's scared that the bear might get out? Would that give him a tamper motive? Okay, but you think, so this guy is saying, of course he didn't go into the hounds, but you think he went into the hound's cage at night. But we've posited an alternative theory that he didn't go in, that he stabbed with a cane without going into the enclosure. that he's not just scared of animals, that he maybe dislikes them. I only accepted this once. Okay, then they talked to him. They agreed with the father. All right. We've since learned that he was at the Pheasant on the evening of the 23rd. Questioned the staff and verified he returned to the estate by 11 in the morning on the 24th, roughly an hour before I visited the police station. This is important timeline information. So he's back by 11 on the estate, and then we visit police noon. That's how we get that noon figure. Roughly an hour before I visited the police station. To me, that's still not an alibi against attacking the dog. Then this guy says at about maybe a quarter past 11, he was spotted in the kitchen by the chef's assistant heading to his bedroom with peppermints at 11:30. And there's our peppermints from the confectionery, maybe. Although if he's in the kitchen getting food, that's a little strange. But it does raise the question of what was he doing in town? Okay, then we get Adalji, who this is the only time we've heard of Adalji, so it sure seems like it's not him, but let's read through this quickly. He's worked for Chalfont for 14 months, so just under a year. Handles the correspondence, no secret that he's not privy to. He knows all about the staff's lives. He's ingratiated himself, but he is prone to take personal umbrage at things. He thinks there's slights against him. He's fond of the terrier, so he likes dogs. I think that's how I'm reading this. It's not more complicated than that. It's just that certain people seem to like dogs and certain ones don't. Okay, and now he's got an alibi. Let's see. He's entered his bedroom on the night prior to Bundo's attack. It's located down the hall from him, and they heard him coughing before sunrise. I think this is his alibi. I think he's got a pretty strong alibi, unless he's doing something very convoluted, and we don't hear from him more. Surely it's not him. They were up till 4 in the morning playing cards on the 23rd. That would mean he went to sleep at 4 in the morning and surely didn't get into town to kill a dog at 11. Okay, next up is the butler, Mr. Summers. Let me just check in the chat and see. Could Alphonse be opposed to hunting with dogs? I don't see how you kill dogs because you don't want them used for hunting. And you're killing dogs that have nothing to do with hunting, too. Okay, you're killing the strays in town. Okay, butler. We're just reading through all this. Okay, his personal situation is weird. He got rid of his wife, but she still hangs out on the estate. He's shacked up with one of the women, one of the maids, but everyone seems fine about it. He's dating Miss Ruby Willis. He finds it hard to keep up with her. We've got a little bit of an alibi for him too, right? Because the night before Bundo's assault, he hears them late at night, exhausted, using the kitchen, because that's the only time Lefebvre will let them use it, when it's late. And so he's focused on his making what are they making again? They're making biscuits or something. As far as I know, he did not leave the estate on the night of the 23rd or the morning, so that's out. He's alibied. And he's afraid of dogs. Even Perky has been known to cause him great alarm. All right. Lewington, here's the zookeeper. He does have specialist knowledge of animals. I know better than the vet. Could I give some scraps to the hounds? he says no, they have to have their very precise food to keep them at their best. And then we're told he's a gambler, and he's occasionally asking our guy for money. He's got poor judgment in betting, so he's likely to owe money to people. But boy, that does not match with killing people. Okay, and then he's got a little bit of an alibi here. I believe Mr. Willingdon was in his bedroom when I left the estate on the morning of the first incident. I walked past his door, could hear the man snoring. That sure seems like a reasonable alibi to me. When he comes back, he's preparing food for the animals. That's his job. He remained on the estate the night of the 23rd and the morning after, save for a brief night stroll for 20 minutes. Okay, good. Now that we know town is 15, 20 minutes away, that's an alibi. You couldn't get into town, murder a dog, come back in 20 minutes. So that's an alibi. That's too short a time to go into town. So Lewington is out. Okay, now let's look at the chef, one of our other rare people who doesn't have an alibi. Monsieur Lefebvre has a colorful background, has, like Mr. Summers, what I would characterize as a complex personal life. He's traveled the world, enjoys making it known. He served as a cook on the expeditions, including disastrous mission where to the both poles. So this is going to be, could be dogs involved. So he could have an animus towards dogs or a love of dogs from that scary expedition. Then he's got his weird wife. Catherine doesn't get paid. She's living on the estate, though. And our guy is shacked up with someone else. Joanna Blounce. They whisper about it as if it's a scandal, but really it doesn't seem to be a scandal at all. He has no secrets from his wife, at least as far as he says. And he seems to love her. Because he's feeding her very special food, he seems to love his wife, in spite of the curious arrangement. Will raise a storm if anybody so much as touches the special meals he carefully cooks for her. That was quite suspicious to us, but now that he's teaching his assistant how to make it with all these special herbs to give her nutrients, that feels right to me. That does not feel like he's trying to poison her. If he was trying to poison her, it just is not consistent with attacking the dogs. It just seems like he is trying to care for her, and I don't see any connection. Let's see. Okay, so here's his alibi time stuff. He was awaiting deliveries in the kitchen on the morning of Bundo's attack. So yes, he is found awake in the kitchen after the dog is attacked. And then on the night of the 23rd, I saw him retreat to his room and close the door close to 9, which makes sense given that Mr. Willington saw him walking out of the kitchen around 9. On the 24th, he was in town as early as 5 to get an early start at the market and did not return until past noon. So here is our first guy who has no alibis. He is, in fact, in town during the dog attack. Both dog attacks in town. So Lefebvre is not just doesn't have an alibi. I'm just going to write down that he was in town. In town during the 24th dog attacks. In fact, in town for an hour after the dog is attacked, right? So what, he's attacking a dog and then continuing about his chores in town. That would have to be your theory, that he hung out in town for another half hour after he attacked the dog, just shopping. Let me see what the chat is saying here. I like the idea the dog attacks her to put suspicion on Derry. Had PTSD, vet pointed to a lunatic, but then Derry getting killed throws that off. The idea about the attacks being to frame Derry is murder is not the planned murder, just potentially stumbled onto something. There'd still have to be another planned murder by poison. Yeah, I don't buy it. But okay, let's continue here. So our chef has no good alibi. Now John League, the assistant, he seems to have a very strong alibi, right? Because he's doing all this stuff while Lefebvre is out of town. He's a history of irritating the chef, being sent on errands, but he asks tedious questions. Let's see. He's scrubbing various things, granting him small amounts of responsibility. He's in charge of the kitchen. The 24th was one such occasion. John was happily starting to gather ingredients for breakfast, waiting for Lefebvre to bring back fruits and sweets from town. When I left the estate that day, on the day of Bundo's attack, I recall him in his usual role, roaming the kitchen. So here's his alibi. One little interesting detail here is that, remember that Alphonse comes back with and has peppermints, and that's at 11. And the chef is supposedly in town buying sweets and doesn't come back till noon. I think that kind of suggests that Alphonse went to get sweets in town and was at that shop where the dog was poisoned on the scene of the crime, rather than getting the sweets from the kitchen. Lastly, my main assistant, Mr. Derry. Here's the guy who was killed. All right, so if we think he was killed for a reason, maybe this gives us a clue. So let's look. Dedicated, harsher towards the dogs than I am, or than Mr. Lewington is with the exotics. I'll do whatever is necessary to get the best out of the hounds, just as I did in Flanders, which is in Belgium. Animals do not obey unless they know there is a little devil in you. They do not obey unless they have there's a little devil in you. I mean, that would suggest that he would be the kind of person who would be unhappy with a disobeying stray dog. But he just wants them to respect. He's not trying to kill them. He was told none of the details to me, but I've heard mention that he has about his terrible loss. He falls silent and shivers. He seems to have PTSD, speaks oddly, stumbling over his words. Too familiar with the local hostelries. He's a drinker. Cannot wonder if he uses drink to numb the memories. The first morning in question, he was in the kitchen when I rose, still barefoot and dressed in his pajamas. This made me very suspicious of him. When Bundo was attacked, he's supposed to not work until later. So I was wondering why he was up and why he didn't rush out to the dogs when he heard the dogs barking. So this is what put me super suspicious of Derry. On the night of the 23rd, he visited the Pheasant Inn, but he was in bed in the morning of the 24th. I awoke him to go into town. This seems to be a strong alibi that he wasn't in town for the 24th attacks or 26th attacks, right? I mean, this is a strong alibi that he didn't poison the dog or hit the dog on the head, because he's been brought into town at 10:30 or so. So clearly he's alibied for it. If you think Alphonse didn't have time to hit the dog on the head, then Derry sure didn't. Okay, now let's look at our second letter. That was our dense letter. The 24th letter is not quite as bad here. Okay, so he says, 2 new strange attacks. These are the attacks in town. Mr. Derry and I were town first thing to settle the account with Mr. Allison, the vet. They go in, and he says they found a dog in Dragon Alley. Okay, we don't know exactly when, but it's the first thing in the morning, so they went in early. It's coughing its lungs out. He gets his medical supplies. He goes there straight away. The person who finds it is Violet Harper, the doctor's daughter. Okay. It's by the Pheasant Inn. Okay, so the Pheasant Inn is near Dragon Alley. All right. It's Miss Mercer's dog, Tugger. So Tugger is the poison dog. Okay. Been running around town like a wild creature. Remember that Alphonse is scared of dogs. If a dog came up to him, he could attack it just out of fear. I'd love to see a scene with the son carrying a cane. Okay, they walk up Dragon Alley. They find Tugger behind the inn, and they see that he's been poisoned. Our vet says it's strychnine, he thinks, in some scraps of food or something the like. They make him throw up. He empties his stomach and he's going to be okay. Okay, then they look around the scene. It's behind the pub. No good tracks, but it was done at least 2 hours ago. And he says, I'm not sure it was done here. It could have wandered around from elsewhere. What were you doing here, we say to the woman. She says, I meet this friend here in the morning before I go to school. That's why we got suspicious of who is this friend. And she says, it's Jackie Dow's, her sort of the butcher's delivery boy. I wonder if we should take a stronger look at Jackie Dow's, because he's run away. He does seem like he was on scene. He would have the meat to poison the dog with. And I do believe we're told that they do get deliveries at the estate. Is it possible that here is our killer, this boy who's been robbing and stealing and is just no good? I'm going to add an entry for Jackie Dow's because I'm thinking about him as a possible... Maybe we better read that ending thing in today's letter about Jackie Dow's again. So she normally meets Jackie Dow's. He's a bit of trouble. We normally meet here, but if he's too busy, sometimes we don't. Okay, good enough. Then we head to the police station. What's this part about relieve Mr. Derry of his duties? Let's see. I dispatched Derry to Allison's office with Tugger. So actually, Derry does disappear from scene. But he's with I dispatched him to Mr. So Derry is alone at this point. Then our guy goes to the police station. So Derry's alone at this point. Something to consider. He's alone but he's not alone when the dog is attacked. That happened before. Okay. So they go to the police station. Could have taken them 5-10 minutes. And as soon as we walk in, the police guy says, that was quick. I just sent a messenger to your practice to come to the station. A dog has been found. Another dog that's attacked. Okay. And then he says, Constable Roberts came in half hour ago. So we think he told us he was at the police station around noon in the other letter, so now we think maybe it's 11:30 or so. Encountered a strangely injured dog. They go down the hallway. We told him about the dog at Dragon Alley. Let's hear where this dog is. All right, here's his description. There was ungodly barking coming from Pullman's Alley. Pullman's Alley is not Dragon Alley. So Dragon Alley is the first attack. This is Pullman's Alley. Different alley. The noise attracted a few passers-by. So it takes some time. He's barking. Eventually people come in. One of them, a barmaid, alerts the constable who was on his beat. He goes to investigate. Then he comes back to the station. And he tells us he went to the entrance of Pullman's Alley. He could see the dog staggering around. Notice the dog's in an alley. It could take time for people to come to it. He looked to be in a daze. It appeared aggressive, which was why no one wanted to approach it. You could see blood on the ground. He figured it had been attacked and was probably only frightened. It's at the station now. We're not quite sure what to do with it. It's doing much better. Time has passed. Mr. Allison says, my God, you've wasted all this time while this dog's injured. Let's go. Let's take care of it. They go to the yard. The dog's fastened to a rope to a pine tree. Constable Roberts was tending to it. He says he was still staggering around when I found him, reeling in a tight circle from a head injury. So I thought I'd better get a tarpaulin. It's a trick I bet they don't teach you at doctor's college. Now, I've used it more than once to subdue a nasty animal. I threw the tarpaulin right over him, got an arm around, and hauled him back. This part about tarpaulin makes me think it could have taken some time to do that, to get a tarpaulin and then use it. Okay, then he says, we're friends now. He had to haul him back. That could take him some time too. Once he was able to examine the beast properly, Allison, the vet, says he was struck with a heavy blunt object. Didn't knock him out. It's hard to say what would have been used, a heavy poker, a hammer, and I think maybe a cane. Constable, there's nothing found in the alley. Robert says, nope, just this old mutt. My best guess, he had gotten into a fight with a stray. Is it possible the fight with the stray is with the Irish wolfhound? He got away from someone. Look at the collar. Mr. W. Grant. Allison says, this must be Wallace's dog. He's worried sick. I'm sure he lives alone at his forge off by Butler's Cross. At least this means I'll get paid. All right, but when we talked to this guy in the recent letter, he just said, the dog runs off by himself for days sometimes. So Allison says he'll bring the dog back for examination. They say they're going to question Jackie Dowse, who the girl was trying to meet. And then he goes to fetch Derry. So Derry's been alone, but not alone, not during a time period for attacking the dog. So that's that. Okay, then he says, now I got to tell you about this thing about the Pheasant Inn and its clientele. Mr. Alphonse is fond of the pheasant, like most people. But I didn't think about mentioning this until Derry nervously spoke on our path home. He says, I saw Mr. Alphonse I was at the pheasant yesterday. I left at nearly midnight. Alphonse is on his way there at midnight. My mind racing with nervous thoughts. He says, we're reading this also to see if the game is telling us something about what it wants. His lordship's son is not only a regular at the pheasant, but also enamored with the mint humbugs. Remember, we're told he comes home and he's eating peppermint. The mint humbugs made at Witherden's confectionery. You may not be familiar with Witherden's brightly colored shot, so I will note it is situated directly across from Pullman's Alley, where the attacked dog was. Okay, so this is a big thing that we sort of glossed over. In my mind, yeah, it's Rob is talking about it now. Pullman's was near the confectionery, unclear how away from the other locations. Okay, so this is important. In my mind, when I read this letter, I thought, okay, it's a tiny little town. There's a poisoned dog who might not even been poisoned at the Pheasant Inn where he's discovered. And then there's a dog found in Pullman's Alley. So the dog's in Dragon Alley, Pullman Alley, the two dogs. In my mind, I sort of had them both right next to each other. And I knew that Alphonse was fond of the Pheasant Inn. And so I thought, okay, that puts Alphonse near the scene of the crime. But this seems much more nefarious now, much more of a startling coincidence, because now you're sort of getting the picture that these two places where the two dogs are found might have been very far apart. And that Alphonse is now seen at both places. We know he goes to the Pheasant Inn where the poison dog is found. Now it seems like where the hammer hit dog could have been quite far away on the other side of town, but it happens to be right near where Alphonse likes to go for his sweets. And in fact, we've got evidence that Alphonse was chewing on some of those sweets when he got home. That feels like a pretty big coincidence for Alphonse being at the scene of both attacks in very close proximity to the attacks. The only thing that we have to sort of temper that with is the idea that we know that the chef does go to that confectionery shop to buy sweets for Alphonse. And we know that the chef was in town during this. So you could put the chef likely to be at that place too. Although I wonder if it's a little bit of a clue that Alphonse comes home first at 11 a.m. and he's seen chewing on sweets in the kitchen. And the chef has gone to town to get fruits and sweets and isn't home yet. So is the fact that the chef isn't home yet a clue that the sweets must have been brought by Alphonse of his own? Or are we to believe that Alphonse is chewing on peppermints that were already in the kitchen, and that's why he went to the kitchen? It's not totally clear. Let's go back to this letter for a bit. He's continuing here about Witherden's confectionery. You may not be familiar with Witherden's brightly colored shop, so I will note it's situated directly across from Pullman's Alley. Lord Chalfont's assistant, Mr. Adalgy, and the chef lament many days on which they or the cooks are made to call on the confectionery for the boys' treats. Mr. Holmes, could Mr. Alphonse be playing a hand in all this? So this is a big issue here. Like, first he's suggesting that Alphonse is involved, but then he's also pointing out that two people are told to go to the shop frequently to get the sweets. So do we think Alphonse went there and got the sweets himself, or is this more of a clue that Adalgy or the chef might have been there? And then he's saying, look, if the son is involved, we better come with proof. This might be read as the game telling us, hey, your job is to prove it's Alphonse. Not clear. Does Alphonse buy his own sweets, though? We're told several times others go and buy them. That's right. That is a real question. And the chef went for sweets on that same day. It's absolutely true. That's a good point. That would put the chef there at the time, too. It's a very good point. If the chef is going for sweets, he probably stopped by Witherden's and he would have had an opportunity to attack the dogs. He certainly got a better timeline, flexibility for attacking the dog. All right, well, let's read the first letter. Let's skim through the first letter again. Okay, we're contacted by Peter Bradley. He says a dog got attacked. Let's look. Maybe our clue to solving this whole case is somewhere in this letter. He's disturbed by the barking at 5 o'clock. He wakes up. He tells us about the whole zoo that's there. But he says 50 yards from my quarters is the dog enclosure. One of the dogs had been attacked. He passed out of consciousness by the time I arrived. Alarming amount of blood and a wound to his flank, to his side. The other dogs are agitated. None seem to have been injured in any way. I wondered if they might have been a fight, but if so, there'd be other wounds. So no signs of anything or anybody or any weapons. He found that his assistant, Derry, was already up, preparing a light meal as the shift was not due to start till lunchtime, 7 hours away. This made me very suspicious of Derry. So they go to the chef. This is our other big suspect. So let's read this carefully. I guess they're not at the chef yet. He advised we lift the dog into something firm. They fetch a large tray from the kitchen. They pass the valet, Bertram, with his fox terrier, Perky, who sometimes agitates the dogs. Bertram says, that's why you sleep in my room. Okay, here's the kitchen. Let's take a close look at this. They find a more suitable helping hand. Lefebvre, the chef, was at his post. He says, I've been up waiting for deliveries. This is the part about, is this Jackie Dow's? Delivering from the butcher? He says they're late today. So, like, the attacks are happening when the delivery guy might be expected. That's making me suspicious of Jackie Dow. Okay, he's chewing on bread. He helps them lift the dog, prepare a cart. And this is great. This is where you picked up that it was a mile away. That was a nice clue. 1 mile away that you found. Someone found that. I don't know if it was Rob or someone in the channel. It's now 6:30 and a maid answered. They go to the vet. He sedates Bundo. He stitches up the wound. He says it was a knife. Have we seen anything like this before? He says, yeah, there was a madman attacking livestock, an inmate going out hunting for someone's food. He doesn't want to be involved. So still, I beg of you, Mr. Bradley, do not involve me in speculations. I don't know why he doesn't want to be involved. He tells Derry, alert the police. He looks around. He can't see any evidence of anything. There's lots of humans around it, so they couldn't find footprints. Then the constables come. He says, oh, well, a large fox or something got in. He says you should lock up the place, purchase a padlock. The estate is kept behind gate, but it's easy to get in. He says, okay, I'm going to buy a strong lock. So he goes to town. He visits the blacksmith, Mr. Droy. He buys a padlock, requested a bolt. And he says, I'm turning from a maker of horseshoes into a security guy. Mr. Rulington was here last week. He had me make a new bolt for one of his cages. He says, you had a break-in too. Sounds like Rulington told him there was a break-in. We go back, we ask Mr. Rulington, who blushed. He's embarrassed to get caught. And he says, look, nobody actually did break in. And I didn't want to tell the Lord Chalfont, make a fuss. But I did need a new lock for the bear's cage. Seems Grizzly's been trying to eat away at it. When I went to bring him food last Tuesday, I noticed metal filings on the ground. I questioned him. You don't think somebody's trying to file through the bolt? To steal a bear? No. Even if he's valuable, he can fend for himself. But I got a new padlock anyway. He showed me a massive piece of metal. And Mr. Droy has fashioned us a sturdy bolt, 3 inches in diameter. He's got a new padlock and a new bolt. Super thick one. That'll take care of his chewing habit. Then he says, then we say, I too wish to avoid upsetting Lord Chalfont, but I'm less inclined to trust Mr. Rulington's theory. Chalfont dogs are kept in kennels in a special enclosure. The entrance is secured with a metal latch. The surrounding wire fences are more than 6 feet in height. And the estate itself is walled off. To get in, you have to go through gate posts. But someone could easily wander the property. I want to point out, it's a surrounding wire fence. This is consistent with the idea that a cane could poke through. If you wanted to stab a dog without having to enter, it seems like you could poke it through the wire fence. He's got his collection. Wish I could provide you with more information. Now he's decided to sleep outside the dog enclosures. Okay. Okay. I feel like let's see. Derry may have witnessed the killer doing something weird that morning. I feel like the chef with his strange recipes has greater opportunity for the poison dog than Alphonse. Where would Alphonse get poison, and when could he poison food to give the dog? I think that's a good point. Back to the initial animal theory. What if some exotic animal has escaped and roaming around? Maybe that is attacking the animals. Rulington got a lock for the cage to try to capture it. You can't have a strange animal roaming around, stabbing people with knives. Stabbing Derry in the stomach with a knife. That just doesn't make sense. We do have the Irish wolfhound roaming around, though, with tufts of fur coming off it. And he says, what if the wolfhound escaped from there, Willington trying to recapture it before anyone realizes? Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't a knife wound, you might theorize that this wolfhound is doing this stuff. But the wolfhound is not beating Derry about the face and stabbing him in the stomach. We don't know if Derry was killed by a knife. Could it have been a claw attack? This is back to the cassowary theory that I originally advanced. That just seems completely implausible now. That there's a cassowary running around town, putting a death blow with its claw. One claw. It's like a precision strike from a cassowary, stabbing them in the stomach. It's a cassowary who's learned to disguise his attack. Demi says a wolfhound isn't a zoo animal anyway. All right, so look, we've really got only two suspects. Is that right? Alphonse and the chef. Lefebvre, the chef, and Alphonse. Aren't those our two? Oh, and Jackie. I wanted to read the latest letter about Jackie because Jackie Dowes is now a good suspect in my eyes. He would be very well positioned to do the poisoning, delivering food from a butcher. And he was on the scene of the crime. He was potentially at the scene of both crimes on the estate. He would have had a reason to get on the estate. So let's read this part about Jackie Dowes. Okay, this is from our most recent letter. I also mentioned there was good news concerning Jackie Dowes. It's not considered to be good news, but the information is fortunate in that it suggests the boy is uninvolved. Let's see why. Two constables were talking. The butcher's delivery boy was caught stealing from Witherden's. That's the confectionery. I think we might have missed that. He was caught stealing from the confectionery. Rather, he was witnessed and subsequently chased. To no avail. He was last seen heading west out of Chalfont St. James 2 days ago. Most importantly, the reason for their discussion appeared to be that Dowes was arrested last night, I see, in Gerrard's Cross. Attempted to steal. Okay, so he couldn't have killed Derry. That's why. So he's got an alibi. All right, so if we're right, if I believe I'm right, and I'd like to hear from everyone else now, it feels like we've only got two people without reasonable alibis. And that's the chef Lefebvre and Alphonse, the son. Alphonse, some people in the channel think have an alibi because he got home at 11 when the dog was probably attacked near 11. To me, that's not a good alibi. The chef's alibis are even worse. He's up in the morning of the first attack, and he's known to be in town by the second attack. And we believe he would have reason to go to the sweet shop. Now, would he have reason to go to the bar, though? where the poison dog was. Not really. Although he would have access to knives and stuff. He is seeing a woman. That would make it a little... And there's no sense of him drinking and hanging out at the Pheasant. So I'm not sure why he would be there. And what's his motive? What's his motive? What's his attitude about dogs? He was on this expedition. He's seeing a woman. He's got a wife. No real mention of his attitude towards dogs, it seems. On the night of the 23rd, he retreated to his room. But then on the 24th, he was in town as early as 5 to get a start at the market. He didn't return until past noon. That's a long time to be at the market. No mention of his feeling about dogs, though. Poisoning could have happened anywhere elsewhere. It just ended up in the inn, yes, and at least 2 hours ago. Nicholas says, I have questions about today's letter. Why would Mr. Droy be up at 5 a.m. since it normally doesn't? Could the smell of hot metal be significant, destroying a knife? Rob says, it's really hard finding a motive apart from crazy animal animosity, which I don't believe is the true cause. So, Droy is the blacksmith who owns the dog, right? And the question is, why is he up and about? Bruises on his face, slightly larger one on his shoulder. Wallace Grant is the guy who owns the one dog. Where's Droy? Maybe we need to look at our last letter a little bit more again. Okay. There he is found. He hasn't been on the estate long. I don't know much about him. Derry's wound would have caused a swift death. Several bruises on his face. Took place in the early hours of this morning. He had been drinking after hours in the pub. They stay open late for special hours. He thinks maybe he got in a brawl. As you can see, he held up a handful of coarse gray hair. There's plenty of dog hair, too. Even now, the wind hadn't swept it all away. There's no dog around when we arrived, but everyone's seen a patchy-haired dog running about. Very weird. Lots of dog hair, patchy haired dog. What is that all about? Fled after stabbing. Okay, and he says, I rose at 5. I could smell hot metal from the smithy, which suggested Mr. Joy was up early. Who's Mr. Joy again? Is that the in-town blacksmith? Have we had much dealings with him? Like, we don't have his biography or anything, right? And then there's this weird thing about how the dog was hiding in the chef's room. Those are weird statements there. He's looking for the terrier's in the chef's room. Anything else? He fed the dogs. He tried to go for breakfast and the chef's not there. The assistant is there. Lefebvre had been with his ailing wife for the past day or 2. She can't digest food we make for the estate, so I'm preparing some gruel especially for her. Lefebvre taught me the recipe. I had to beg him. Lots of ingredients. Liver even. He learned it while traveling. Then they visit the 2 dog owners. The chef, Chalfont often has his chef bring me food. So it's Chalfont's generosity that has her brought food. Okay, let's see. And Lefebvre has not been seen lately. He hasn't been here in over a week. That's a little bit suspicious that he normally comes there, but he hasn't been visiting them, even though he's there for a long period of time. Allison brings back the pooch. He's mad at them. Then there's Jackie Dallas. Is the coarse gray hair supposed to be the dog? Dairies or the dogs? I took it to be the dog. Nicholas says, another question is, how did Mr. Bertram's dog escape from him since it sleeps in his room, and how did it end up in the chef's room? Rob says, I read it as if Derry got his hair pulled out. Not me. Coarse gray hair. That sounds like dog hair. Debbie says, I'm going to bed soon, so I'll say Lefebvre still seems like the most likely suspect. No alibi, went to the sweet shop early, easy access to knives and poison, maybe poker for the fire. Lots of odd absences over the past week. Put assistant in charge of the kitchen, made weird food with liver and bitter herbs, supposedly for his wife. He's not afraid of animals like Alphonse. Boy, that's a pretty convincing summary. No idea of motive, though, unless related to his past. That's pretty convincing summary of access to, what do we call that? That's basically opportunity in terms of having the weapons and the skills. Means. That's the means. And he's got no alibi. Maybe you could even suggest that there's a, in a murder case you're asking who benefits, what's the motive, but you could, when you're dealing with some sort of psychotic attack, you might ask a different question, which is what's the stressor? Are any of these people undergoing a stressful event that would make them act out? And maybe you could make the case that he's dealing with wife issues that's stressing him out. That would be if we think he's attacking these dogs for sort of psychotic reasons rather than some experiment, which I don't believe I believe it is a medical experiment. I mean, I don't believe the theory that it was a medical experiment or seeing how to disable dogs. It was an interesting theory in the beginning. It just doesn't seem to hold up. Well, I'm going to put my bet on Alphonse. I think that as appealing as what you're saying about the chef is, the fact that he's teaching the assistant to make his wife's food suggests to me that that's a red herring. The fact that he needs all these odd foods and ingredients that are not easily found suggests to me an explanation for why he's having to spend so much time in town. He's not afraid of dogs, but then that gives him no motive to hurt the dogs. Whereas Alphonse is so desperately afraid of dogs, I wonder if he's just not coming out of town drunk and encountering these dogs. And he says, I'm not convinced the wolfhound is a stray. I think Derry may have been attacked by a man and the wolfhound working together. Nicholas says, was it already suggested that Mr. Derry was a werewolf and he killed in his wolf form, weaving around his gray wolf hair as he transformed back to human? It has been suggested that we could be dealing with a supernatural werewolf situation here. The real problem with that theory is the knife wounds. Just don't seem... Well, one theory is the knife wounds seem clearly like simple surgical knife wounds, not like a massacred body. Also, several people, including a cop, saw this wolfhound. So I think they would know the difference between a large stray dog and a werewolf. But it is very weird that we've got this stray dog running around. But doesn't, let me pitch you a different theory though. If all of these dogs are strays that are roaming around town, does it not feel more consistent that they might be attacked by someone who fears and hates dogs? Like that Alphonse is coming out of these houses drunk with some anger, and these dogs are sort of yapping at him and chasing him or something, and he's striking out at them. Whereas your chef theory is that he's going to town shopping in broad daylight and he doesn't hate dogs, so he's doing them for some other odd reason. Like he doesn't like strays. I mean, can anyone really come up with a reason that you would attack these dogs? So let's think about it. One, you could imagine, I could imagine that when Sherlock Holmes sends us his solution next week, I could imagine that you guys could be right. I could see him saying Alphonse has a timeline alibi. I would not be happy with that because I don't think it is a tight timeline alibi, but you could see that happening, in which case the only one left would be Lefebvre, the chef. So if you're inclined to believe that Alphonse couldn't have done it, the second attack in time, then that would pretty much leave you with only one option, the chef. So that would be one reason to think it's the chef. And one reason from a game perspective that you would think it has to be the chef, because that you have to rule out Alphonse based on timeline. Otherwise, you don't have any way to decide between the two of them. When is Derry killed with our last letter? He's found this morning. What's the timeline? The murder took place in the early hours of this morning. That could mean anything. Had been drinking after hours in the pub and came out for a brawl. Okay, I think that does point more towards Alphonse than Lefebvre. Lefebvre is getting up very early going into town for shopping, like at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. in the morning, whereas Derry is killed coming out of the Pheasant. The chef is dating a woman and has a wife that he's caring for. We had no indication that the chef is going to hang out at this bar. So I'm going to settle on my guess that it's Alphonse the son. Rob says, even if we only have the chef available as a suspect, what's his motive? Especially the damn bear cage, that doesn't make sense. Okay, I'm going to pitch my explanations again, which haven't changed. I want to hear yours, and then we're going to have a vote. So my explanation is that Alphonse Chalfont, the son, is deathly afraid of animals, is a army vet, is angry and afraid of the animals, and he's goes and gets drunk at this bar frequently till the very late hours of the morning, and comes back in a violent mood, has a cane, stabbed one of the dogs through the thing, got away with it, and has now started to attack dogs in town. That the dog that was poisoned and hit on the hammer, the dog hit on the head with a heavy thing, was hit on the head by a cane that I'm presuming Alphonse has on his way back home, which gives us a very tight timeline, but he hit the dog on his way out of town. And then just last night, he was out drinking at the Pheasant. Derry, who's a little bit suspicious of him and who also frequents the Pheasant, was drinking there too. Alphonse leaves, Derry catches him attacking the stray dog in the alley, confronts him, and Alphonse Chalfont stabs and kills Derry. That's my theory, and if I had to come up with a theory for the bear cage, it would be that Alphonse was messing with the bear cage to make sure it would hold the bear, or maybe he was trying to get into the bear cage to kill the bear. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't care about bears. I'm not sure. I don't have a good answer for the bear cage, except maybe the most likely cause is exactly what the bear keeper thought, that the bear is just chewing on the bear cage and it was a total coincidence. That's my theory. If I had to have a backup theory, it would be the chef was doing it, but I don't have a good reason for it. Let's hear your theories. Ginny says, was Alphonse hiding something about his military service? Well, Alphonse is very private. He doesn't want to talk about anything. He doesn't talk about his military service details. He won't give us any alibis. He won't tell us anything. Ralph says, back to the gray hair. What if it was from Derry's attacker? He ripped it while trying to defend himself. I'm going to go reread that part about the gray hair. See if I read it the same way you did. I just don't see it, though. We're not told anyone has gray hair anyway, so how could we... Okay, so Derry was at the pub special hours, where they're open very late into the night. We think he found himself in a brawl. Okay, let's see what it says here. They think he wandered into the alley and got in a brawl. As you can see, he held up a handful of coarse gray hair. There was plenty of dog hair too. Okay, so I think you're misreading it to think that he's opening up hair and saying, well, in addition to this hair, there's dog hair. I think he's saying, hey, there was plenty of dog hair too, and showing the hair. So I think the cop is saying this coarse gray hair is the plenty of dog hair. A frighteningly large stray dog. Imagine, Alphonse comes out of the bar, drunk. He's deathly afraid of animals. He's super afraid of dogs. And he gets startled by this dog. Maybe he's out drinking with Derry. He gets startled by the dog. He goes to kill it. Derry tries to stop him. And he kills Derry. Derry and Alphonse are crossing paths quite a bit. They both served in the war. Derry says he passed him on the way home. Well, let's hear your other theories. Rob says, I think Jesse's right. He shows the gray hair and refers to it. Gray hair is from the animal. Yeah, I believe so. There's our 4 letters. All right, I've made clear what my theory is. I'm not exactly thrilled with it, but it's my best guess. I don't have a good explanation for the bear cage, except that Alphonse is terrified of the animals getting out, so maybe he was messing with it to see if it really was secure and safe. Nicholas says, I have a feeling those gray hairs will be crucial to the solution. So, you are free to theorize that it's a werewolf, but it feels like Sherlock Holmes' story, this is not going to be a werewolf. But we don't know. Remember, different writers write these cases. Maybe you get someone who's interested in a supernatural case. But if it was going to be a werewolf case, we would find people would be massacred more. People would be torn up more. It's just too weird to have such clean knife wounds. We're told explicitly that Derry was stabbed in the stomach, and it was clear that that stab wound was going to kill him. That seems more like, well, something a war vet could do, or something a chef could do. I sure wish we had a better picture of Alphonse with a cane, though. Emmy is back to the poison theory. Emmy says, I think the chef plans to poison his wife. He's got another woman and the wife is lingering on. The attacks put suspicion on others as assistant allowed to cook for his wife. I don't, no, I don't buy it. I do not buy it. It was a very interesting theory. He's had plenty of time to poison the wife. The wife's dying anyway. No one would be surprised if the wife died. And what's your explanation for how he just killed a human? He just killed Derry. Like, surely does not need to get done if your goal is to kill your wife. You're not going to kill off another human that get into a potential fight to the death. Ross says, I'm not giving up on the animal culprit just yet. I need to sleep on it. Derry found him attacking a dog and tried to stop. I think the chef went to poison his wife. Okay, so Memi is agreeing with me on the fight of Derry, how Derry got killed. Just not who the attacker is. Nicholas says, the wife is dying because the chef is poisoning her. She wouldn't die otherwise. Well, I really loved that theory when we originally came up with it. Whoever started us on that path. He's only feeding her. He won't let other people feed her. It sounds like he's poisoning her. But on the other hand, it's taking so long to poison her to kill her. But even so, think about it. Let's say he's poisoning his wife. Let's say the chef is poisoning his wife to get rid of her, and he's doing it slowly over weeks, months. You don't need to do anything more. Like, yeah, just up the poison and kill her. No one's suspicious of it. You're getting away with it. She's gonna die from your poison. You wouldn't suddenly, in a period of a week, kill 3 dogs and a man. That would just be insane. Your poisoning system's already working. You're killing her. You don't need to create some incredibly convoluted murder that's going to bring cops and Sherlock Holmes onto the scene. That just seems insane. You've got a simple plan to poison your wife and it's working. In fact, she should be dead already. You wouldn't be poisoning her so slowly. If you needed to up the dose, you'd up the dose. You wouldn't have to stab dogs. Like, it was such a fun idea that he was practicing poisoning the dogs. But the fact that there's a dog hit on the head, there's a dog stabbed, Derry stabbed and killed, that does not mesh with a sophisticated plan to poison your wife. But Derry's death does fit the idea that Derry stumbled on something. And all the fur in the alley with the stray dog does make sense that Derry stumbled onto someone abusing a dog, doesn't it? It feels to me like the most likely thing is Derry stumbled on someone abusing a dog, which means the whole case is all centered around someone abusing animals. And if you had to pick someone that might abuse an animal, I guess the question you have to ask yourself is Alphonse so afraid of animals that he wouldn't abuse one? Or is he so afraid of animals that he would abuse them? The problem is both the chef and Alphonse seem like they're long... I'll tell you what, though, what settles it for me, Chef versus Alphonse. What really settles it for me is Derry is killed on the early morning after drinking at the pub, and he's killed outside the pub. Probably because he stumbled on someone abusing a dog. To me, it's that late night last death at the pub that really cinches it for Alphonse. Like, the chef does not frequent this pub. The chef has 2 women he has to care for. Whereas Alphonse is the single man who goes out drinking all night. So for me, that's it. I'm locked in. It's Alphonse. Nicholas says, Derry himself has uttered, I'll do whatever is necessary to get the best out of the hounds, just as I did in Flanders. Animals do not obey unless they know there's a little devil in you. Yeah, I mean, you could try to make the case that Derry is the one attacking the dogs, and someone good stumbled on Derry. I mean, that's an interesting alternative theory. But Derry has alibis for the poison and hammer attack dogs. So it couldn't have been him. You could imagine a scenario where Derry and Alphonse are working together somehow, though. All right, guys, it's time for you to have put your money where your mouth is and make your theories. And we can talk a little bit more about, if you have more theories, if you're watching this not live, you can post your comments on this video of your theories, and we can talk about it for a week before we get the solution, and we can talk about everyone's latest solutions before we open the final solution from Sherlock Holmes. But I do want you on record now with your theories. I'm on record for my theory. Derry might have used the wolfhound. It turned on him. Yeah, but what, did the wolfhound stab him with a knife? All right, make your votes. Not votes. I could bring up the vote thing, but I guess we could bring up the vote thing. All right. Just type vote and then your one-line summary of your theory. Nicholas says, I'll be on record saying that I cannot come up with a satisfying solution yet. Rob votes cassowary. You're not, I want you all to come up with your best theory here. I'm not holding it to you. I'm not holding you to it for when we read the solution. You can change your mind between now and in a week when we read the solution, but I think go on record as to what your best guess is. I think that's part of the fun and challenge of these things, is to force yourself to make your best guess, to verbalize your best guess. I find that in life in general, it's very easy to look back and think, well, I kind of thought this, I kind of thought that. It really helps to sort of force yourself to explicitly come up with one theory. Emmy is saying chef. Rob is saying the escaped animal / cassowary. Is anyone going to vote for werewolf supernatural? That would be a reasonable option. I probably have a little bit of a bias towards the rich, spoiled son of the Lord, like thinking he can get away with anything. So that's my biases kicking in to partially suspect Alphonse. Mike, the minds of these royalty sons feels like they could get a little warped into thinking they're untouchable. He can go make political enemies. The Lord buys his way out. So he'd be more inclined to sort of skirt with doing things that he feels like if he got caught, his father will buy him out of jail or whatever. Nicholas says, I think the solution will be more complicated than a single person being responsible for anything. I mean, that is a reasonable meta guess. Not based on evidence, but just based on the fact that this game should not be presenting such a weird, simple case of a madman. Rob says, I've been thinking about that. Hard to say whether we don't know how these cases usually go. It's just hard to come up with any reason why you would attack these dogs like this. I suppose you could entertain the idea that if you ask cui bono, who benefits, the one person who does benefit is Mr. Allison, the vet, right? Like, the vet is getting all this work from this. So could you imagine a situation where this vet is going around killing these stray dogs and he got caught by Derry and then had to stab Derry? Seems very unlikely. He seems to genuinely care for the dogs. And we don't have any alibi information on him one way or the other. And how does he get on the estate to kill the dog? Rob says, I think the hardest fact to squeeze into a theory is the bear cage. I've just solved that by not worrying about the bear cage, treating it like a more of a realistic thing where it's just a coincidence. Rob says, I hope it's not supernatural. That would be very disappointing. I would agree with you. And he says, if it's supernatural, I feel like it massively changes how we approach future cases, changes the expected rules framed by it by being Sherlock Holmes. Yeah. Okay. I think I've squeezed out votes from everyone I can squeeze out votes on. Nicola is refusing to vote. Rob has voted escaped animal. Emmy has voted chef. I have voted for Alphonse. All right. And in the channel, everyone who's not watching us live will express their best guess. If all goes well, next week we'll get the solution. We'll talk a little bit before we read the solution. You'll have your final chance to get on the record your theory. Then we will read the solution next week and we'll talk about the case. See if it makes sense. See if we disagree with it. Talk about the experience of playing the case. Is it possible that the solution is going to be finding stuff that we overlooked? That's our best case scenario. Best case scenario is the solution makes sense and we missed the clues. That seems like a tall order. Before we stop, Emmy says, I think the wolfhound is a wolf escaped from the estate. And the reason for the lock was a lie. I like that idea. But you're saying you think it's a wolfhound. Remember, an Irish wolfhound is a dog. Your theory is that there's another dog that's not kept in the cage with the rest of the hounds that's escaped. And that what? Lewington is trying to recover it and stabs Derry. It's an actual wolf. Well, either way, what's your theory for how Derry got killed then? That the wounds are not knives? I mean, okay, sorry, I was about to sign off, but let's talk about this for one more second. When we read the first letter about the dog wounded in the flank with a knife, my favorite theory was that it's not a knife wound, it's an animal attack, like a sharp claw. Now we've got Derry killed after hours at a pub, stabbed with a single knife wound in the stomach, but also bruised up. If you're willing to say that both of those clear knife wounds were somehow wolf attacks, no, it still doesn't make sense. Because then how does the wolf poison the dog? Is someone trying to poison the wolf and gets the other dog? And then how does the dog get hit on the head? How does that connect with the wolf? Does it say a single knife wound for Derry? Well, it says he got hit he's getting beaten up, and he has a knife wound in his stomach that would kill anyone. Seems very clear that it was a one knife wound in his stomach that killed him. He's got bruises on his face, larger one on his shoulder. I don't know where the knife wound in the stomach is. I don't know. I can say that Derry's wound, singular, Derry's wound would have caused any man a swift death. So that's a singular wound. However, and here's the stab wound to the stomach. Dead with a stab wound to the stomach. That seems very specific. Not a weird wound that could have been a stab, but a stab wound. Bruises in the face would be consistent with a fight with an animal, would it not? Not the way I think of it, no. No, not to my mind. Dog's teeth break skin. You don't get bruised up in your face from an attack with a dog or a wolf. You get punctures on your extremities. Hands, arms, feet. Those are the wounds you get from a canine. Puncture wounds, hands, arms, feet, legs, extremities, not bruises on your face and shoulder. A dog does not attack your shoulder. And a dog doesn't really attack your face either. Dog will attack your hand. Defensive wound, dog grabs on hand, won't let it go. Rob says, remember, a stab wound might be a lot of things. It's not a coroner's report. Well, I do find it intriguing, the idea that these wounds might all be mischaracterized. However, if you're theorizing about the kinds of mistakes a vet might make, or that the cops might make in a case involving dogs, you wouldn't expect them to so quickly discount the possibility that a stab would be a bite. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you bring a body into a coroner and you say he fell out of a building, well, you could see how the coroner might miss a contusion from a hammer and think, oh, he landed his head on the ground. But that's because context is set, falling out of a building, he's thinking about certain things. But if you bring a dog body in, the vet's going to be thinking about whether a wound could have been made by another dog or another animal. So that's going to be foremost on his mind when he's looking, is this a knife wound or a bite wound or an animal attack? Same thing, if the doctor's been looking at animal attacks, he would be looking at that stab wound, especially if how he's full of dog hair and a dog was seen. The first thing he's going to think is, could this have been a dog attack, a wolf attack? So he's not going to be so quick to discount that possibility. So if he says it was a stab wound, he probably looked at that and said, is there any way this could have been a dog attack? Okay, I've made my cases. We've been on the air for 3 hours on this fourth letter talking about it. It's time for us to sign off. One quick last look at the chat for anyone to vote Rhino Theory here. If you're watching this after we film it live, please do put your comments on this fourth video. Get your theories on the record. We'll meet in a week to talk again, read the solution, and talk about the experience. I'd be curious to hear what your experiences are. Give some thought, though, to the idea that the pleasure and the joy of this experience should not rest entirely on the solution. The process has been very engaging, incredibly engaging talking about it. It's been fun hearing all the theories. It's been fun debating them. I'll see you next week for the finale of the Chalfont Outrages, and we'll start our next case soon after. And then if you want to stop by the Board Game Geek Guild for this channel and help us decide what longer games to play this week, I'd love to hear your input, and I'll see you next time.